I would hope that we can bypass bloodshed. It would be an lovely thing for East Africa. It would really retard our progress terribly, and we need progress. What we should be doing is not arm ourselves. What we should be doing is get on with the job at hand, which is to make things much easier for our people than they are at the moment.
Mr. Munyawayaki, commenting on the deteriorating relations between his country and President Idi Amin's troubled Uganda. It's a situation that's threatening the whole stability of East Africa. This is the most visible evidence of the dispute that's flared between the two nations. Convoys of petrol tankers held up on the Kenyan side of the border with Uganda. The lorries haven't crossed because their drivers are afraid they'll be beaten by the troops of President Amin, and their loads will be hijacked en route. For Uganda's beset by economic problems, and Kenya claims Amin's been stealing supplies he couldn't otherwise afford. Kenya stopped providing Uganda with fuel and other supplies because Amin hasn't paid all his bills, an act that's enraged the unpredictable president. He's retaliating with a wave of anti-Kenyan propaganda. Now he's threatening war. The danger is that Amin will go one dramatic step further and seek actions to work. The present dispute goes back a month to President Amin's alleged part in the hijacking of a French Airbus and its 253 passengers and crew. Israel, who organized a rescue of the hostages, claimed Amin had a hand in holding them prisoner and shot it out with Ugandan forces at Entebbe Airport, destroying 11 planes and killing about 20 Ugandan troops. Amin was furious, and because the Israeli commando force had refueled at Nairobi, he charged Kenya with aiding the Israelis. Kenya's denied Amin's accusations, but since they were made, relations have gone from bad to worse. The situation has brought anxiety and uncertainty to the formerly stable regions of East Africa. The effects are not confined just to Kenya and Uganda. The neighbouring tiny state of Rwanda is also an innocent victim. Almost everything needed in Rwanda for day-to-day living had to be imported. And the country's most vital 1,000-mile road, which links it by way of Uganda with the Kenyan port of Mombasa. The distance served to set Rwanda's trading routes and starved the country of essentials like petrol. The government has been forced to impose stringent petrol rations. Sometimes only 20 litres are allowed. And getting just that involves holding a special queue.
Have you been in this petrol queue this morning?
This morning, 3 hours.
3 hours?
3 hours. I think 3 hours.
And how far have you moved in 3 hours?
10 meters.
How long do you have to normally queue to get petrol during this crisis?
It's possible 10 hours.
Rwanda's exports are also being delayed.
So each week?
Thousands of tons of tea and tens of thousands of tons of coffee have been held up, putting pressure on the country's beleaguered economy. Rwanda is actually Africa's poorest state and its most overcrowded. But Rwanda's plight is nothing to Uganda, where President Amin has ordered all but essential transport off the roads to conserve petrol. Our East African Airways are no longer landing at Entebbe Airport because of the shortage of aviation fuel. At one stage, the President claimed to have petrol for only 5 days, though in apparent contradiction, he stated his forces had enough to fight for 3 months. Kenya is not the only country to experience worsening relations with Uganda. Britain, too, has fallen foul of Amin's wrath. The acting British High Commissioner, James Hobbs, was among Britain's expelled from Uganda by the President. In fact, Amin found reasons to expel all but 2 minor diplomats from the British Empire.
When did you know that you had to leave Uganda?
Remaining in the country,
I think you all
diplomatic relations with Amin
heard the radio announcements.
The President so often described the member of the country. Perhaps another reason why Britain felt compelled to break with Uganda was the growing number of disquieting reports being made by Britons leaving the country. They've said the streets of Kampala are full of soldiers, sometimes seizing Britons for interrogation. Even Ugandan civilians are living in fear, never knowing when another purge will be ordered by the President. For Britons, leaving has been difficult, with the central bank in Uganda withholding permission for the purchase of air tickets. The port of Mombasa. For landlocked Uganda, this is the gateway for the equipment and fuel Amin needs to keep his army running. Some supplies have been paid for, not all. Amin continues to complain that Kenya's mounting an economic blockade to strangle his nation. Much of the equipment in Mombasa's docks and sidings shows signs of having been there for some time. Evidence that the dispute's been going on far longer than the headlines of the past 2 weeks would suggest. In the past, when Uganda's been short of money, Colonel Gaddafi of Libya has helped out. This time there's no sign of that happening, and there's the risk that Amin might feel he has to make a show of strength to force Kenya to release supplies. So what are the chances in the future of Kenya's being able to solve the crisis with President Amin is in
Uganda,
charge?
whilst President Amin is in charge?
I have my doubts. I have my grave doubts. If he was a straight man, he could do that. But we are willing to try. We will try any time that he is showing any sign of sticking to something that looks like an honorable position. If he presents to us a position which we think he might keep for a month or two, then we will have a good look at it.
But the principles that you've laid down for normal relations, the 7 principles, many of those surely are quite impossible for him to fulfill.
Well, it's up to him. He should be able to fulfill. There's no difficulty. He should stop the propaganda. He must move his troops away from there. He must stop taking other people's goods. He must pay us for our goods. He must pay for goods that we have already supplied. That kind of thing is not impossible.
Kenya can't throw much of a punch. Its army is only there's 7,500 men. Kenya only has 38 armored personnel, not a single. Kenya's not the only country aware of the firepower of Ugandan forces. Tanzania also has cause to remember when President Amin attacked border towns in 1972. For months, there'd been clashes on the border between his forces and those of a guerrilla group intent on his overthrow. In retaliation for the continued shelling of Kinkagati, Amin sent in aircraft with devastating results. The air raid caused heavy damage and casualties in the town of Mwanza across Lake Victoria. This is Kisumu, the likeliest spot in Kenya for an attack by Amin if he feels he's been pushed too far. Kisumu's a sleepy, undefended town, just a short trip across the lake for the president's troops. Uganda's shortage of fuel is likely to rule out raids further afield at Nairobi and Mombasa. So strictly civilian targets within easy reach appear obvious alternatives. Amin's strength is his army, the army that brought him to power, the army he uses to keep him there. Uganda's forces are both larger and better equipped than the Kenyan opposition. 21,000 men, 27 Russian tanks, supported by modern artillery. The Air Force has 48 combat aircraft, including 30 MiG fighters. Though his forces are President Amin's personal pride and joy, they're also a source of anxiety. For it's from the army that several attempts have been made to depose the president, though details of such failed coups are far from highly publicized. For the first 9 years of independence, Uganda was ruled by Milton Obote. The man who brought the country to statehood in 1962 held power at the head of a one-party government. There were no major political upheavals in the young country's first decade, but Obote made one serious misjudgment in his administration: the promotion of an unknown young officer, Idi Amin, to the post of Chief of Staff of the Army. While Obote was on a visit to Singapore in January 1971, Amin seized power. The coup was totally successful. The ambitious Major General, a former colour sergeant in the King's African Rifles, had the backing of the army and the police force. Things were to be different in Uganda, or so it was promised.
All foreign countries should not fear, and also in my new government, I will honor all agreements signed by the former government. This is point number one. Number two, we believe in United Nations. Number three, we believe in Organization of African Unity. Number four, we believe in East African Community. Number five, we shall maintain good relations with all countries throughout the world.
Do you think there could be the possibility of a war between two countries in the East African community?
I have no any intention of fighting any country at all without any cause.
At first, the Amin regime was welcomed as a liberal change, especially by the 100 political prisoners Amin released from jail. They had harsh words for their treatment at the hands of Obote.
What sort of conditions have you spent the past 4 years in?
The conditions have been horrible.
Why? What has happened to you?
Food has been bad.
Yeah.
We've been kept indoors with less exercise. First of all, we began with 23 hours indoors.
Yes.
Then it was reduced to 18.
Yeah.
Then 7. And then back to 23 until this morning.
When did you hear that you were going to be released?
Well, we knew from rumors by Monday midday.
Yes.
Monday midday.
What happened in the camp when you heard about that?
I felt on top of the world.
You have a celebration.
One of only 2 native soldiers commissioned by the British Army before it pulled out of Uganda, and a heavyweight boxing champion, Idi Amin could claim to be a man of the people. One of his first acts was to bring back the body of King Freddy for burial with full military honours. The exiled King of Uganda had died in London 2 years earlier, and the honours accorded him were described by the new government as an act of national reconciliation. Amin himself was a pallbearer, but although the gesture was grand, the question of a royal family was never raised again in Uganda, and the king's 16-year-old son remained unrecognised. The promised early elections weren't forthcoming, and by the time the first anniversary of Obote's overthrow came round in 1972, Amin had established unquestioned control over the country. His new promise was that after 5 years under military rule, Ugandans would be allowed to elect a civilian government. But even in that first year of power, there were rumours that his political opponents were being hunted down, imprisoned or killed. Allegations repeated in an International Commission of Jurists report the next year. Amin next turned his attention to the economy. The country, although rich in natural resources, was poorly developed. Most Africans in Uganda were poor farmers, and those who earned their living in the towns ran only the smallest shops and businesses. As in other East African states, most of the country's commerce was in the hands of Asians. Brought to Uganda as railway labourers by the British colonial regime in the 19th century, the Asians had prospered through hard work and a natural flair for business. They now formed a closely knit middle class. In a sudden move to Africanize Uganda, President Amin decided to expel the Asians, and he was in no doubt about where they should go.
These Asians were brought by British here to Uganda. Therefore, the British and those, they are responsible to look after those Asians, because I have got also difficulty in Uganda of economy. And as I have said when I took over, I will make sure that before I hand over the government to another government, I must reorganize this country properly, and this is a part of my program to follow.
While the Asians besieged the British High Commission for entry visas, their property was being shared out among their African neighbours. They were allowed to take only £50 with them on their journey from a country which didn't want them to a country bitterly divided over their admittance. 80,000 Asians were affected, and Amin laid down 3 months as the time limit for their departure, a period on which he remained adamant. Appeals to the President from the Asian community, from other African states, and from the British government all fell on deaf ears. The British accepted responsibility for their passport holders, but asked for more time to arrange an orderly exodus. The man who was fast earning himself the reputation of a ruthless dictator made it plain that no concessions would be made, and hinted at ominous consequences for those Asians who failed to make the deadline.
Uganda will be independent after this, my decision, after I want to see that the whole Kampala street is not full of Indians. It must be proper black, and administration in those shops is run by the Ugandans.
Would you like to get all Asians out, really, sir?
Yes, they must go to their country.
Even nationals of Uganda?
If they want to go, they are welcome to go.
What prompted this sub people if they don't go by the time limit?
I think they will be sitting like they are sitting on the fire. I will tell you this. You just wait after 3 months.
What will you do to them?
Okay, you will see.
You said you wanted Uganda.
I think they will not sit comfortable here in Uganda. I will tell you this. I must actually tell you the truth.
The expulsion had the approval of most Ugandans, and the pro-Amin rallies were well attended. Relations with Britain, already deteriorating, became even worse when Amin nationalised British companies and expelled technical experts, following Britain's decision to end all aid to Uganda. But the worst point in Uganda-British relations came when Amin threatened to execute British lecturer Dennis Hills, who'd referred to Amin as a petty village tyrant in an unpublished manuscript. Amin's former commanding officer, Lieutenant General Sir Chandos Blair, was sent from Britain to intercede. At first it looked as though he'd succeeded, but the President then demanded to negotiate personally with Britain's Foreign Secretary.
I told General Blair, if Foreign Secretary is not here within 10 days from tomorrow, with the recommendations and advice I got from the members of the Defense Council who are right now before me, we will then consider when to execute him by the firing squad.
Mr. Callaghan did go to Uganda, but took pains to point out that his visit wasn't made under duress. In fact, it took place only after Hill's release had been secured through the mediation of Zaire's President Mobutu. When the Foreign Secretary and the Ugandan President met, animosities were briefly set aside in the widespread relief at Hill's reprieve.
Thank you so much. Mr. Hills, would you look up a second?
He's Mwanga.
Hello, Mwanga.
The Israelis, too, had fallen foul of Idi Amin. Israeli military advisors who'd been stationed in Kampala to help train the Ugandan army were expelled in 1972. In a move that committed Amin to the Arab cause. The President, now self-styled Field Marshal, had paid a visit to Libya only weeks before and found a strong friend in Colonel Gaddafi. Amin was promised training for his fighter pilots, military supplies and 2 new hospitals, and virtually overnight became anti-Israeli. His new relationship with Arab states was strengthened through the Organization of African Unity. At the Kampala meeting in 1975, the Ugandan president became chairman of the 46-member organization, a development that didn't meet with universal approval. Tanzania boycotted the conference, but the new chairman was well enough received by the majority of delegates. Also attending the conference, Yasser Arafat, leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization. The previous year, Arafat had addressed the UN. Now his cause was taken up in the African Forum by President Amin.
We must support completely this Palestinian case, and we must do everything possible to see that those people who are against the principle and the charter of the United Nations which the Israeli are members and South Africa have been members, must be expelled from the United Nations.
Amin, a Muslim who had been married 4 times, didn't allow affairs of state to interfere with private life. He chose the middle of the OAU conference to take yet another wife. A 19-year-old waitress became the 5th Mrs. Idi Amin in a surprisingly quiet ceremony in Kampala. After the wedding, back to the conference and the subject of South Africa, and a predictably strong line from the organization's chairman.
If we accept the tent, we will have lent our support to foster plans of destroying our brothers permanently. Yet it is Voster who must be destroyed.
To make his point more dramatically, Amin invited all the OAU delegates to watch a mock invasion of Cape Town by Ugandan forces. The exercise gave the president an opportunity to show off his newly equipped armed forces, a demonstration that probably impressed his immediate African neighbors more than it did Pretoria. In Addis Ababa, 6 months later, a special Organization of African Unity conference convened to discuss the Angolan civil war. The issue divided Black Africa into 2 camps, moderates supporting a coalition of national unity in Angola, and pro-left militants who wanted the Marxist faction in Angola recognized as the rightful government. Amin took an uncommitted position between these 2 views.
You see, we have not come here to discuss Russia, Cuba, or anybody. Any force in Angola, whether is from Europe, from Africa, from South Africa, who are already with the arms in Angola, they are killing Angolans, and they are doing harm to the people, to the life and the property of the people of Angola. They are killing innocent people. Therefore, we condemn everybody, not Russian, not Cuban, not only South African, even Black African. They are condemned. If also Ugandans are there, they are condemned.
The conference ended as divided as it began, and its capricious chairman used the occasion for yet another of his bizarre impromptu press conferences. In the last 5 years, Idi Amin has generated various emotions. Tanzania has called him a fascist murderer. Other states have been less severe in their judgments, although often embarrassed by his behavior. But whatever the criticisms, they've done little to temper his own self-confidence.
I do both politics and sports.
Which is the most rewarding? What is easier?
And even tactics I use in sport by knocking out people I use in politics also.
How do you knock them out, sir? How do you knock them out?
But you know that in Europe they thought that Africa cannot think themselves. But I think you find that in modern Africa today, we, the leader of modern Africa, we are better today in politics as a European politicians. I think you should know this.